Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Philosophy in a Minute, where each week we break down a different philosophical concept. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting scenario proposed by the 20th century American philosopher Robert Nozick. But before we get into it, we'd like to ask you a favor. So in Nozick's thought experiment, imagine that one day you find yourself facing an extraordinary opportunity. There's been a machine developed that allows you to plug in and experience pure, unadulterated happiness. No more sadness, no more pain, no more frustration, no more disappointments, just perpetual bliss. Plug in, and from that moment on, you live in a world of eternal sunshine where everything you experience is perfect. You're plugged into the machine and you're given these scenarios, one after another, each better than the last. You're spending time with loved ones who never leave your side. You win every game you ever play. You eat the most delicious food you can imagine. Every sexual partner you ever dream of is at your beck and call. Your intellect is used to solve problems that once seemed insurmountable. Everything is perfect. All of it simulated, but completely indistinguishable from reality. So the question becomes, would you enter the machine? Now this scenario creates a number of interesting questions. On the surface, it seems like the decision to plug in is a no-brainer. Who wouldn't want to live a blissful existence free from pain and sorrow? But upon further reflection, things become a bit more complicated. The first reason some people give for refusing to plug in is that they do not want to live a life that isn't real. They value truth and authenticity, even if it means experiencing pain or suffering. Perhaps you think that reality is worth preserving for its own sake, regardless of how unpleasant it may be at times. For example, you might argue that experiencing genuine emotions like love, friendship, compassion, grief, sadness, anger, etc., is far preferable to having those emotions artificially simulated. In this view, plugging in would be like living a dream or a fantasy. And while that might sound appealing at first, it would ultimately be unsatisfying, because it would be clear that your experiences were the result of a machine turning a biological switch in your brain, rather than the result of genuinely interacting with the world around you. This way of thinking suggests that we have a fundamental need for authenticity, a desire to live a life that is genuinely ours, even if that means experiencing pain and suffering along the way. Another reason people give for not plugging in is that they don't want to be passive consumers of happiness. They want to be active participants in creating their own lives. The trouble with the happiness machine is that it makes you dependent on technology to feel good. It turns you into a couch potato who is hooked up to a machine that controls your emotions. Many people worry that such a development would lead to a loss of personal autonomy and a decline in human agency. What's more, they argue that it would also take away our ability to improve ourselves. The happiness machine raises a second set of interesting questions. What if the machine doesn't just give you pre-packaged experiences and instead allows you to do pretty much whatever you want, but it just makes sure that you don't encounter any obstacles or setbacks? In this scenario, you can still be whoever you want to be, do whatever you want to do, and have whatever you want, but without any of the hard work, struggle, or risk that comes with it. Think about being able to learn a new language or musical instrument in mere seconds, or being able to build a business empire without ever having to worry about competition or bankruptcy. It seems like this kind of machine would offer the best of both worlds. You could have your cake and eat it too. But what would that say about the nature of the human experience? Is our desire for happiness really compatible with our desire for meaning? Can we really be happy without first facing challenges and overcoming obstacles? So let's turn to some more recent work for some answers. In his book, Flourishing: Why We Need Compassion and How We Cultivate Our Best Selves, the philosopher Mark Goldie offers an interesting perspective on this problem. Goldsworthy argues that we are indeed capable of flourishing or living a good life without being subject to an overarching narrative of progress. According to him, it's possible to live a life that is both meaningful and happy without having to constantly strive for greater success or fulfillment. Instead, we can learn to appreciate the present moment and find meaning in the midst of everyday experiences. However, there is another camp of thought that disagrees. Philosophers like John Stuart Mill and more recently, David Benatar, believe that pleasure is the ultimate good and pain is the ultimate bad. Mill's famous super-utilitarian calculus tries to quantify and optimize pleasure and pain. According to this view, we should aim to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, both in our own lives and in the world as a whole. And Benatar takes this a step further, with his idea of hedonistic altruism. He argues that we have a moral obligation to maximize pleasure not only for ourselves, but for all sentient beings. So let's bring this all together. By framing the debate between truth and illusion in terms of pain and pleasure, we can see that there are two competing values at stake. On the one hand, there's the value of authenticity and the desire to live a life that is true to oneself. On the other hand, there's the value of pleasure and the desire to avoid pain and suffering. When we consider the happiness machine, we realize that it's possible to eliminate pain and suffering from our lives. But at what cost? Are we willing to sacrifice our authenticity and our connection to reality in order to do so? Or do we value truth and reality more highly than happiness? These are difficult questions, and there are no easy answers. Some people might argue that the decision to plug in or not is a personal one that depends on our individual values and priorities. Others might argue that we have a moral obligation to choose authenticity and truth, even if it means experiencing pain and suffering. Still, others might argue that the value of happiness is so high that we should plug in, even if it means sacrificing some of our authenticity. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to plug in is a personal one that each of us will have to make for ourselves. But there's another way to approach this problem. Maybe we don't need to choose between truth and illusion, because it's possible to conceive of a third option. Perhaps we can create a world that has the best of both. Consider the following. What if we could create a world that had all the pleasures of the simulated world without the drawbacks? A world where we could still feel genuine emotions, have meaningful relationships and accomplish great things, but without the pain, suffering, and death that inevitably accompany those things. A world where we could still be authentic and true to ourselves, without having to worry about making mistakes or failing. A world where we could still experience reality without having to worry about losing ourselves in it. Such a world might seem like a pipe dream, but it's not impossible to imagine. And if we can imagine it, then it means that we can work towards making it a reality. What this thought experiment suggests is that we don't have to choose between truth and illusion, authenticity and artificiality, pain and pleasure. Instead, we can work towards a world where we can have both. We can work towards a world where we can feel genuine emotions, have meaningful relationships, and accomplish great things, but without the pain, suffering, and death that inevitably accompany those things. A world where we can be authentic and true to ourselves without having to worry about making mistakes or failing. A world where we can experience reality without having to worry about losing ourselves in it. This is the ultimate challenge of the happiness machine. Can we create a world where we can have our cake and eat it too? Can we create a world where we can have the pleasures of the simulated world without the drawbacks? If we can do this, then we will have solved the problem of evil. We will have solved the problem of suffering, and we will have solved the problem of death. Thanks for watching.